also known as Tre, which I believe that's for the third person, right?
It is.
Yeah. Is a director of career services here at Point Loma Nazarene University. He's a thoughtful scholar who has centered his research on the experiences of Black college students and how they can thrive during and beyond college. In this, he's passionate about cultivating the kind of community he calls Black liberatory spaces. His dissertation for the PhD in Education for Social Justice at University of San Diego is titled From Counter Spaces to Community, Qualitative Case Study Analysis of Black Community Making and a PWI. Point Loma is a PWI, but if you don't know. Along with offering helpful new frameworks, his work is the winner of USD's 2024 Dr. Joyce Spencer Champion Dissertation Award. Alongside all of that, Dr. Watkins, or Tre, is a good person who's making a difference in the world. He loves learning, he loves teaching, he loves writing, he loves his family. He's a good friend. And it doesn't take long to find out that he's a proud alumni advisor for his fraternity, the Lambda Iota chapter of the Phi Beta Sigma fraternity.
Blue light.
All right, our guest of honor is Jesmyn Ward. She is the author of books, articles, and short stories that are sure to be read and taught for generations to come. Her writing offers readers an invitation to wonder our way to honesty and healing. She is a MacArthur Genius Grant recipient and a 2-time National Book Award winner. That is a rare place to be. In 2024, the New York Times listed 100 best books of the 21st century, and 3 of Jesmyn Ward's books were in that list. Oprah Winfrey is an avid reader of Jesmyn Ward's books and says her book, Legacy Send, is a vital work for our culture. While she's a sought-after speaker and writer, she's a professor of creative writing at Tulane University in New Orleans. We are thankful that in the midst of her busy schedule today, she's agreed to take time to meet with us. It says something about her own commitments to students and Black community on the college campus. We're so thankful you're here with us, and let us give a warm welcome.
That's a hard one. I mean, when I think about my work and when I think about fiction, I always approach it from a place of care, right? It's about the people who I am writing about, right? And so the way that I think about place.
And your writing, your characters, appreciate you sharing, starting from that place, right? There's a level and depthness to the intimacy with your work that you can really feel, that you can experience, you can almost hear it, you can almost see it, you can almost feel the emotions that are going on. And I appreciate the direction, because the reason why I say the questions, your writing truly honors the fullness of Black life. So there's grief, there's struggles, yes, but there's also joy, there's also love, right? There's those things as well. You talk about the importance of centering Black life specifically, especially in a world that often seeks to misrepresent, to flatten it, or even just outright erase it.
Right. Let's see. So the reason, I was a reader before I was ever a writer, of course, right? I fell in love with reading as soon as I learned how to read. I was taught how to read in the first grade. And I remember being very little, younger than that, and wanting to know how to read and flipping through books, but for whatever reason, my brain was not wired to catch up to learn how to read very early, right? And so I was in the first grade. One of the things that was difficult for me when I was growing up in my reading life specifically was that it was hard for me at that time to find characters who looked like me or had the same sort of backgrounds as I did in the children's and young people's literature that I was reading, right? Now, feel like it's markedly different today, right? But when I was growing up, that was the case, right? And so I harbored these I had these secret dreams of being a writer, but because I was the first person in my immediate family who was going to college, was going to a four-year university, I felt all this pressure to do something practical and therefore smart, right? Go to law school, take the LSAT, do something. My mom wanted me to be a doctor, even though I was terrible at math, right? So, that there was a certain amount of pressure to do these other things. And then, some of you may know this because I wrote about it in the memoir that I wrote in Unburied. When I graduated from college, when I finished my undergrad years, my brother was hit by a drunk driver. Mom was killed.
Accomplish that, and leads to my next question. I do want to touch on something you mentioned in your desire to be a writer, but the tension in pursuing that passion, that dream, and ultimately your calling, and trying to do something practical, a smart decision. That's a decision our students have to do. This is a decision that we as adults have to deal with as well. But and also sharing, bad short story after bad short story, right? It doesn't just come easy. It didn't just happen. It didn't just become a national book winner. It didn't just become a MacArthur genius, right? It comes through work and failure. But again, you've done it, and you are in that long and powerful literary tradition, Black literary tradition. Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Jordan L. Hurston, Alice Walker, Lorraine Hansberry, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Steve Ewing, Casey Lehman, and so many more. And you talk about being a reader before a writer. Which writers or works do you find yourself returning to often when you need inspiration or even guidance?
I feel like I return to all the writers that you just named. I return to their work. I mean, so for example, KSA is my friend. I love it. I call him, that's my cousin, my play cousin, right? I love Heavy. Yeah. Heavy, I feel like, or not reading Heavy particularly, right? Because Heavy came out after my memoir, after Unburied. But his collection of essays, How to Slowly Kill Yourself in America, reading that collection was, in part, it played a really big role in helping me to understand what I wanted to do in my own creative nonfiction and what I wanted to accomplish in Unburied, because the essays that I read in that collection, they were so honest and so raw and so almost fearless. So there's a fearless quality to him and his work. And there's also a tenderness there that really inspired me, because before I read those essays specifically, I was very much struggling with writing creative nonfiction. I hadn't done a lot of it before. Of course, I'd never written a memoir before, right? And I think that part of me was afraid to share these very personal stories, right, from my life and from the lives of people who I love and I care about, right? But the tenderness and the honesty with that he said, did it with in his essay collection, that inspired me. It made something click for me, and it also, in a way, sort of helped me to understand that it was possible, that I could write about the people who I love, the people that I care about, in an honest and tender way at once, right? And I feel like every one of those writers, like Toni Morrison, I love it, and with the bluest eye, and Alice Walker with the color purple, and Natasha Trethewey with her portrait, Jericho Brown with his portrait, like all of these writers, sort of teach you again and again, and I think it's a lesson I have to learn again and again, that it's possible, that it's possible to write with beauty and with heart at the same time. So yes, I read a lot, and I return to those works again and again, especially because I feel like I don't learn, I feel like I have to return to those books again and again, because I learned something new every time, right? So yeah, so I'm indebted, I feel like, to the writers, who came before me.
And it's awesome to hear you, the camaraderie in the community with our contemporary writers. KSA's word, given that it's, the word tenderness is beautiful. When I think about his work, I think of his vulnerability, especially from a Black man. You don't typically see that in any space whatsoever. And so it's that, I like the word tenderness there. For me, the work that I force myself to go to every year, at least, is the autobiography of Malcolm X. That's the one it's seeing a person reinvent themselves and pivot and switch and creating impact. And his, I know Martin had a dream, but Malcolm was a dreamer. He had a vision, and he was working towards that, even if it meant failure, even if it meant at cost to his own personal life, his self. And so I appreciate that. Talking a little bit about our context of higher education, it's been rough. A little bit. I try not to watch the news, but it follows us, and we've had affirmative action get struck down 2 weeks ago. The new Department of Education wants to ban all of this, right? DEI, Black spaces, anything mentioning race. We still got a few more days, so we're good. Do it. And you attended PWI, right, Stanford? And so you have some familiarity with these spaces. I'm thinking about that and the news that continues to what keeps you going, but then also what advice you have, especially for our Black students, and how to continue to be themselves, but also take care of themselves and have some semblance of hope.
It's hard. I think we formally do this, right? But I ended up taking nearly every African American lit class that I could go. I also studied literature. I also studied, there were some African literature classes that I took when I briefly studied abroad. So it was as if I was sort of studying the literature of the African past. And that was really important, I think, for me to seek out that kind of work and that kind of art and that kind of scholarship by us, because it showed me that it was possible, right? And it helped me to not feel so alone and to feel some kind of kinship, right? Even though, who knows what the landscape at Stanford looks like now. But I know that back then, I was at Stanford in the mid-90s, that these spaces did exist, right? So there was the Black Student Union, there was so there was and it wasn't all Black, but I think the majority of the students who lived in that house were Black, right? There was a lot of programming that was built in to the house and that was around the house about the Black student experience. And so that was, I took advantage of those spaces where I had been. And so that was helpful too. I don't know, I think that we've all been struggling. I know I have. I try to avoid the news, and then I will, go on Blue Sky and doom scroll for 2 hours at a time, even though I should be working. But in part, that's how I've been getting my news, is hard. So I don't know. I think that for me, it's helpful to return to those writers, that I first discovered. Lala was an undergrad, right, who did the work before me, and who did the work during a time when it was even worse than it was now, right? To speak truths to power, to write about your people with love nothing but tenderness and honesty, right? And so I've been trying to do that, right? And to remember that just as they made it through, right, and made great art, but made it through just the practical ways in their lives, that the same is true, should be true in this present, for us. And two, I like to think about, like I think about my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents, like my maternal grandmother was very important to me. She was one of the first storytellers in my life, right? And she would just part of her, one of the things that she would do when we would have these huge family gatherings, she would just tell stories, and so it was my grandmother who told me stories, and taught me about sundown towns, right? And she would tell the story all the time about how when she was a child, because my grandmother's father was, I think he was maybe a quarter white, right? Like, I think one of his grandparents was white, or maybe his mom was white. Anyhow, my great grandfather was very pale, was very light skinned, right? His mom was white. They had a car, right? So they would go, this is in the 1940s. So they would go up to this town called Kim, which is just north of Louisville. Y'all might have heard of it because Brett Favre is from the Kim. And so they would go up to the Kim and they would visit my great-grandfather's aunt, right? In this white part, right? And we take my grandmother. My grandmother was brown skinned. So a couple of her siblings are brown skinned. Like they had a whole range of skin tones. But you can look at my grandmother and you can tell she was of African descent, right? And so they would go up and they would visit for the daytime, and then the white aunt, as the sun was beginning to set, she would say, okay, she would say, it's time, I think y'all should go ahead and go, right? Because it's not safe for y'all to be up here, right? So the Kim was in fact a sundown town, right? And so in order to get back home safely to Deville, my great-grandfather, who I guess could look white in the dark, and his mom, who was white, would ride in the front, and then all the kids, they would put them in the trunk of the car, which they called the boot. That's what my parents said, they called it the boot. And so they would have to ride back in the trunk of the car, right? Probably anxious, panicking, right? Just very fearful, right? Nothing ever happened, but my grandmother would tell me this story when I was a kid, and as I got older, I was like, oh, my grandmother was talking about sundown times, right? So, I'm sorry, it's like a long answer. but I feel like I look at, what my grandmother lived through, right? And that's just one of many of her stories. What my great-grandparents lived through, what my great-great-grandparents lived through. And I feel like it is not my place to despair. If they didn't despair, if they had hope and if they fought, right, then that's what I have to do now, right? Because that's their legacy.
And ultimately, that's the only way that we can exist, right? That's a bar right there. Because again, it is tough, and we can recognize that, right? And I don't know if you all are familiar with sundown towns, but they are a thing. They were a thing. And we have sundown towns in San Diego. I'm from here. I live in East County, and there are places that I will not even in the daytime, will go. So they are still a thing. But yes, right? How do we continue to persist in light of these things that happen, not just when we live, but at school, right? And hearing the importance of being in Black spaces, right? Being in community with each other is important, and also immersing yourself in Black life, right? Through literature, through coursework, however possible, is helpful. I do want to open up for questions if anyone has any at this time.